The first explosion rocked Zixus Prime like a dying star's last breath. Tak Ven, High Overlord of Station Operations, barely had time to process the impact before the alarms screamed across every deck. A moment later, the station's AI cut in with the cold precision only a machine could manage. Emergency code read: uncontrolled plasma ignition detected in Sector 12G, evacuation protocols engaged. Risk of catastrophic structural failure at 78%. Fire suppression measures ineffective. Repeat, ineffective. Tak Ven's jewel heart slammed against his ribs. Ineffective? That wasn't possible. Zixus Prime was one of the most advanced space stations in the known galaxy, a technological marvel built by a coalition of 100 species, each contributing their best innovations. And yet, when he pulled up the fire suppression feed, his worst fears solidified. The plasma fire was moving like a sentient thing, crawling across walls, snaking through vents, and devouring energy instead of being smothered by it. Automated fire barriers deployed and melted instantly. Magnetic containment fields, meant to suffocate any flames, only seemed to fuel this inferno. A Vorksian engineer, a chitinous exoskeleton scorched, stumbled into the command deck, gasping. It's not just a fire. It's consuming our emergency power grids. Every attempt to starve it makes it worse. Tak Ven forced his mandibles shut, staring at the holographic map as the fire spread across the station like a crimson plague. The AI's latest projections were terrifying. 20% of the station compromised in the first 5 minutes. 35% within the next 10. Total loss of control in less than an hour. And that was the optimistic estimate. The only option left was the one Tak Ven despised most: containment through sacrifice. He turned to his officers, speaking the words that would cement his place in history as the commander who made the hardest call. Seal off every affected sector. Purge them into the void. A hush fell over the command deck. The Drazul tactical officer, a towering reptilian warrior species, blinked his slit eyes. Sir, civilians are still inside those sectors. Tak Ven's voice was steel. I know. Even as he spoke, another explosion detonated, gutting an entire habitat ring. Thousands of life signals winked out on the displays. The fire wasn't just killing them, it was erasing them. All across Zixus Prime, panic set in. Escape pods jammed from overload. Ships collided in the docking bays as civilians and crew alike scrambled to flee. Screams filled the emergency channels. Even the cybernetic Shaltari Collective, a race of machine-enhanced strategists, were broadcasting raw distress signals. No species in the known universe had ever beaten a Class X plasma cataclysm. Tak Ven closed his eyes, preparing to send the final authorization code that would eject the burning sections into deep space, condemning tens of thousands to death so the station might survive. Then a voice crackled over the emergency frequency, one that hadn't spoken since the fire started. Carter here. You're evacuating way too early. Tak Ven froze. Who? A second later, a human face appeared on the main holo feed, streaked with soot and sweat, eyes blazing with determination. I'm going in. For the first time since the fire had begun, a silence heavier than any vacuum filled the command deck. Tak Ven heard a dozen different officers murmur in confusion. He knew that name. Carter, one of the humans assigned to the station's low-priority emergency teams, given that humanity was still a relatively new addition to the Galactic stage. Why wasn't he running like everyone else? Why wasn't he afraid? Hart then activated the direct line to Carter's suit, his voice sharp. "Identify yourself, human. What exactly do you think you're doing?" The human gave a grin, but there was no humor in it, only a fierce, unbreakable resolve. "Captain Elias Carter. Earth Fire Rescue. Let's put this bastard out." Tark then felt his mandibles part slightly in disbelief. Had the human lost his mind? Nobody fights a fire like this. Nobody survives a fire like this. And yet, Carter had already vanished into the inferno. The command deck of Zixus Prime was a symphony of chaos. Officers from a dozen different species frantically relayed evacuation orders, rerouted emergency power, and argued over containment strategies, all while knowing none of it would stop the fire. And yet, Tark then found himself staring at one small, soot-covered figure on the main holofeed. Carter. The human was moving through Sector 12G, a place that no living thing should have been able to survive. Heat levels there had risen beyond the melting point of most metals, and yet he wasn't disintegrating. His exosuit, already scorched and peeling in places, wasn't the advanced nanotech armor of the Vorksians or the ablative shielding of the Tark Ven's own species. No, it was a human firefighter suit, primitive, outdated, ineffective. And yet he was still walking. Tark then snapped out of his trance. "Human, get out of there. You do not have the equipment to handle." Yeah, I heard the whole impossible fire thing already." Carter's voice crackled through the comms, barely audible over the sound of roaring flames. The feed showed him moving through a corridor lit entirely in orange and red, every surface pulsing with unbearable heat. Fire suppression drones, designed by some of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, lay in melted, useless heaps along the walls. Tark Ven had seen battlefields. He had led wars against cybernetic warlords and faced down bioplagues that wiped out entire fleets. But this was something else. A war against the very laws of physics. And yet, Carter didn't hesitate. He moved with purpose, stopping at a wall panel and manually prying open a service conduit with his gloved hands. The hollow feed flickered as his helmet camera focused on the pipes running along the ceiling. "There you are." Tark Ven's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "Your suppression systems are failing because they're trying to starve the fire with vacuum fields." Asterisk, Carter's voice was calm, even as a molten support beam collapsed just meters behind him. Asterisk. But this isn't a normal fire. It's self-sustaining. It's eating energy, not just oxygen. Tarkvan already knew this. Everyone knew this. What they didn't know was how to stop it. Carter, however, was already cutting into a coolant line with a handheld plasma saw. "So I'm gonna stop treating it like a fire," he said, "and start treating it like a chemical reaction." Before Tark then could protest, Carter punched open the coolant valve. A burst of freezing liquid nitrogen sprayed into the corridor, instantly creating a massive thermal shockwave. The flames around him didn't just dim, they shrank away, as if recoiling from the sudden temperature drop. Tark Ven's eyes widened. It was working. The fire was actually retreating. A stunned silence fell over the command deck as Carter stood there, watching the inferno pull back like a wounded animal. The human exhaled, cracking his neck. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Then the next explosion hit. The coolant pipes Carter had just tapped into ruptured under the strain, sending him hurtling backwards. The holofeed blinked out for a moment, and when it returned, all Tark Ven could see was smoke and fire. "Carter." A coughing fit came through the comms, followed by a low, irritated voice. Yeah, I'm still here." Tark Ven almost couldn't believe it. A Tark Ven warrior wouldn't have survived that blast. A Droz-Ul would have been incinerated instantly. Yet, Carter was still moving. A background, a new sound joined the chaos. Screaming. Tark Ven's tactical display showed the source. A group of trapped civilians, cut off in a residential block just beyond Carter's position. If the fire reached them first, they were dead. Carter didn't even hesitate. "I'll get 'em." Tark Ven snapped his mandibles together. "You'll never reach them in time. The fire is still spreading." "Then I'll go faster." The feed showed him sprinting into the flames. No calculations, no hesitation. Just a human running headlong into certain death, because he refused to let anyone die while he still had breath in his lungs. Tark Ven had been wrong. This wasn't a war against physics. It was a war against human stubbornness. And for the first time in his life, Tark Ven wasn't sure which would win. Carter ran straight into the fire like it was nothing more than a particularly bad house call. The emergency feed showed him moving through the remains of a residential corridor, his suit's built-in thermal shielding blaring red-hot warnings against the heat levels. The structure groaned above him, warping and buckling from the intense temperatures, but he didn't stop. In the background, screams echoed from somewhere ahead. The civilians, still alive. Tark Ven's mandibles tightened as he watched Carter yank a thermal axe from his pack and swing it into the bulkhead door, separating him from the trapped residents. The blade carved into the metal, sending sparks flying as the molten wall gave way under brute force. It was insanity. No one in the command center could look away. "This human," one of the tactical officers muttered, staring at the holofeed. "He's not afraid." Tark Ven's claws dug into his console. No, he was afraid. He just didn't care. The emergency AI had already written off those civilians. The fire was moving too fast, consuming entire sections of the station at impossible speeds. Tark Ven's own logic told him Carter's attempt was futile. But humans didn't seem to care about what was impossible. A final axe swing split the warped metal, and Carter surged through the opening. The holofeed flickered, refocusing on the dozen civilians huddled in the farthest corner of the room. 6 Vorksians, 3 Tark Ven hatchlings, 2 Shaltari cyborgs, and a single, terrified Droz-Ul warrior. Their eyes locked on the soot-streaked, helmeted figure stepping through the smoke. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Carter jerked his head toward the hole he'd made. "If you can walk, move. Now." The first Vorksian bolted for the opening. The others followed until the station lurched violently, throwing them against the burning walls. One of the hatchlings shrieked in pain. Carter caught them before they hit the ground. Tark Ven's breath hitched. The child would have been incinerated. The human had just saved them with a reflex faster than the station's emergency shielding. The Drazul warrior, still frozen in shock, blinked slowly at Carter. "You went through that hellfire to get us," he rasped, his voice hoarse. Carter grunted, shifting the injured hatchling onto his back. "Yeah, and I'd rather not do it twice, so let's move." Tactics in the face of chaos. Arcven had never seen a species work a problem the way Carter did. Instead of stopping to calculate or waiting for an AI projection, the human adapted instantly to the changing environment. Obstacle. The corridor leading back to safety was already half consumed by the inferno. Schön. Carter rerouted through an old maintenance hatch, yanking it open with his bare hands. Obstacle. The hatch led to an exposed, depressurized section. Death for most species. Solution. Carter sealed the corridor behind them, rigged an emergency oxygen canister, and forced them through before the flames overtook their last escape. Obstacle. A collapsed support beam blocked their final path. Solution. Carter strapped the Drazul to his back, grabbed 2 Vorksians under each arm, and sprinted through a side passage, weaving through collapsing debris like it was a game. Tarkven's entire command team sat stunned as they watched the feed. Not a single move was wasted. Not a single action was second-guessed. The fire wasn't thinking. Carter was. No one left behind. The moment the human burst through the final airlock, the station's fire suppression field finally engaged, sealing the section behind them. The surviving civilians collapsed onto the deck, gasping. The human didn't. Instead, Carter pulled off his half-melted helmet, exhaled sharply, and turned to the trembling group. "Anyone hurt?" he asked. Of the Vorksians blinked at him in disbelief. "You are." Carter glanced down. His arms were covered in scorched patches, his suit partially fused to his skin, and his breathing was raw from smoke inhalation. He wiped a soot-covered hand across his face. "Yeah, well, nothing permanent." The Drazul warrior, still dazed, managed to push himself upright. "You could have left us." Carter gave him a flat look. "Not an option." Silence. Then one of the Tarkven hatchlings scurried forward and grabbed Carter's arm. The room froze. Argven himself felt his breath catch. Hatchlings never touched outsiders. Never. And yet this child, this Tarkven child, had latched onto the human. Carter blinked down at them. He sighed, ruffling the small creature's spines. "Yeah, kid, we're good. The Galaxy Watchers." Back in the command center, no one spoke. Tarkven stared at the emergency feed, at the human standing over the survivors, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Every species had spent years categorizing humans, classifying them as reckless, emotionally unstable, primitive. And yet, in the face of absolute destruction, Tarkven was forced to accept something else entirely. Humans weren't reckless. They just refused to lose. Tarkven exhaled, tapping into the comms. Carter. The human looked up, blinking as if surprised to still be on the call. "Yeah." Tarkven stared at him, at the walking contradiction standing in the aftermath of the impossible. "What's your next move?" Carter cracked his neck, reaching for his oxygen tank. "I'm going back in." The command deck was silent. Tarkvan's mandibles twitched in disbelief. Going back in? The human was already half burned, oxygen-starved, and standing on sheer willpower alone. Any logical being would recognize their limits. But humans weren't logical. At least, not in the way the galaxy understood. Tarkvan clicked open the channel. "Carter, you've done enough. We are evacuating the remaining sectors." The human pulled a half-melted glove tighter over his injured hand and adjusted the oxygen flow on his suit. "No, you're not." Tarkvan stiffened. "Excuse me?" "There are still people in there," Carter said, already turning toward the next fire zone. "I've seen worse." Tarkvan felt his spines prickle in frustration. "You have not seen worse than this." "You ever see a petroleum refinery explosion on Earth?" Carter shot back. "Because I have. 3 times. Fireballs big enough to light up the sky for miles." Tarkvan's secondary heart skipped a beat. 3? "Did you survive them all?" Carter grunted. "Wouldn't be here if I hadn't." The Drozol warrior, still recovering on the floor, stared at the human with a mixture of awe and horror. "Your people run toward fires that large." Carter shrugged. "Somebody's gotta." Tarkvan shut his eyes for a brief moment. This species was going to give him a stress-induced heart failure. The fire that shouldn't exist. The holographic map showed the inferno crawling deeper into the power core sectors. The fire wasn't just destroying the station. It was adapting to every countermeasure. Artificial vacuum. The fire folded into smaller pockets, waiting for new fuel sources. Emergency coolant sprays. It melted the valves before they could activate. Oxygen cutoff? It didn't need oxygen anymore. It had evolved beyond a fire. Tarkvan turned toward the tech officers. "We need a new plan." The Shaltari AI specialist clicked their metallic fingers. "There is no plan. The fire is reacting too fast." Carter's voice cut through the noise. "Then stop thinking like engineers and start thinking like firefighters." The command team turned toward the human. Carter pointed at the holographic display. "You're treating this thing like an accident. It's not. It's an active disaster, and you don't fight disasters with theories. You fight them with action." Tarkvan's eyes narrowed. "And what exactly do you suggest?" Carter's fingers flew across the console, marking a series of coolant lines running near the reactor core. "Your automated systems are too predictable. We need to flood these chambers with a randomized release of cryogel before the fire can counter it." The AI specialists tilted their head. "That would require a manual override at each sector junction." Carter nodded. "Then I guess I'd better start running." The suicide sprint. Tarkvan watched in something between fascination and horror as Carter vaulted back into the burning corridors, oxygen tank slamming against his back. The temperature warnings blared immediately. Flames lashed across the bulkheads, but the human moved like a predator through the chaos, ducking under collapsed beams, leaping over burning conduits. The first override station came into view, half-melted, sparking, barely functional. Carter didn't even slow down. He slammed a fist into the manual release, cracking the frozen mechanism open, then wrenched the valve sideways with his full weight. The pipes hissed, then burst, releasing a wave of cryogel that sent the flames recoiling. One down. Carter sprinted to the next sector. Harkven's tactical officers watched in stunned silence as the human moved faster than even the battle-trained Drozol could manage in full combat armor. "He's using the fire zone movement against it," one of the Vorksian tacticians murmured, hurting it like a living thing. Another valve, another burst of coolant. The Inferno shrieked back. A command deck held its breath. But Carter was already gone, barreling toward the final control station, the most dangerous one, located directly next to the power core's heat exchangers. A place no sane being would enter. Tarkven's mandibles clenched. "Carter, that section is unstable. You'll be incinerated." The holofeed flickered as Carter skidded into position, hacking through the last emergency panel. "I'll be fine." The power core detonated, the last stand against the Inferno. The shockwave sent a firestorm ripping through the chamber, blasting Carter off his feet. His holofeed cut to static. Tarkven felt his stomach drop. The command deck froze. No one spoke. Then, through the static, a low voice muttered, "You gotta be kidding me." Screen flickered. Carter's feed came back online, his helmet cracked, his suit fried, but his damn hands still working the override valve. He coughed hard, sucked in a breath, and gritted his teeth. Not dying today. With a final bone-cracking heave, Carter yanked the last coolant release. A shockwave of freezing vapor exploded outward. The Inferno screamed. The fire's unnatural movement twisted, recoiled, and then stopped. Victory or madness? A command center watched as the last flames flickered out. Tarkven barely processed what had happened. The fire that had defied all known science, the disaster that had doomed the station, was gone. Because one human had refused to accept defeat. The holofeed showed Carter staggering to his feet, swaying unsteadily. He glanced at the wreckage around him, then clicked his comm. "Told ya it'd work." And then, finally, he collapsed. The command center exploded into chaos. Arkven's mandibles clicked in agitation as he watched Carter's unconscious body sprawled across the burnt deck plates. His suit was torn, blackened by soot, and the emergency vitals readouts on his holofeed were flashing red. "We need medics in there." "Now," Tarkven barked. The Shaltari AI specialist tilted their head, observing the human's readings. "His oxygen levels are critically low. Organ stress is evident. He should be in terminal failure." Tarkven's claws flexed. "Should be." But humans didn't die when they were supposed to. The Vorksian tactician, still monitoring the emergency scans, let out a bewildered chirp. "His brain activity is stabilizing." "How?" The command deck fell silent, watching as Carter's body twitched slightly, his fingers curling against the scorched deck. A cough rattled through his comms. Then, against every logical projection, he moved. Resisting death through sheer spite. Carter's eyes sluggishly blinked open as the emergency lights pulsed dimly overhead. He tasted iron in his mouth, his lungs burned, and every inch of his body screamed at him to stay down. He ordered. The groan that sounded more annoyed than pained, he forced himself up onto one elbow. His vision swam, but he could hear the frantic voices in his comms. "Carter, do not move." Tak Ven's voice snapped. "Medical teams are inbound." Carter grunted, pushing himself to his knees. "I got work to do." Tak Ven's mandibles flared in exasperation. "The fire is gone, human. You do not need to fight anymore." Carter wiped a hand across his face, smearing soot and dried blood. He looked around at the devastated chamber, the cooled remnants of what had once been an unstoppable fire. He had won. So why was the power core still rumbling? His stomach dropped. Tak Ven's voice came through his comms again, sharper this time. "Carter, acknowledge. Do not stand." Carter ignored him, stumbling forward toward the primary control panel, his knees nearly giving out as his boots scraped against the ruined floor. His gloved hand slammed against the console, pulling up a diagnostic scan. He barely needed to read it before he cursed. The real threat. The fire wasn't the only problem. The station's structural supports had been weakened. The emergency venting system had bought them time, but the damage was already done. The power core was entering a delayed cascade failure. It went, the entire station would go with it. And the evacuation wasn't finished. Carter's mind kicked into high gear. He wasn't an engineer. He wasn't some tactical strategist. He was a firefighter. And that meant he had one job left. "Tak Ven," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "We need a full lockdown on the reactor shielding. That buys us 5 minutes." Tak Ven was silent for half a second too long. Then, "Explain." "The coolant bought us time, but the explosion stress cracked the main containment frame. We've got microfractures leading straight to the core." Carter inhaled sharply, feeling his ribs protest. "If I can reach the emergency dampeners, we can slow the meltdown long enough to get the last evacuees out." A horrified silence stretched across the comms. "You are not serious," the Shaltari AI specialist said flatly. "Dead serious." "You will be dead if you attempt this," Tak Ven growled. Carter glanced at the unstable reactor pulse, then toward the emergency hatch leading deeper into the power relay systems. His legs ached. His chest felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. But he'd been burned before, and he wasn't going to lose anyone else today. One more time into the fire. The last thing the command center saw before the holofeed cut out was Carter yanking a ** spanner wrench from a ruined toolbox and forcing the emergency hatch open with a raw, inhuman ** effort. Then he disappeared into the reactor chamber. Tak Ven slammed his claws against his console. "Send a strike team. Get him out of there." The AI specialist hesitated. "Sir, the chamber is reaching fatal radiation thresholds. Any response team would perish before reaching him." Tak Ven's claws tightened, and yet the human just walked in. The Drawzol warrior, still recovering in the medbay, listened to the comms and muttered a single phrase under his breath. Madness. Or perhaps something far worse. A human unwilling to accept reality. The unbreakable will of a dying man. Inside the reactor chamber, Carter's vision blurred. His suit's warning alarms were a constant, shrieking symphony in his ears. His oxygen reserves were nearly gone. His radiation shielding was failing. Didn't matter. He dragged himself forward, wrenching open the manual stabilization controls. The heat from the reactor scorched his exposed skin, but he forced his arms to move, slamming emergency release valves into place. 1, 2, 3. His breath came in ragged gasps. The console screen flickered. War on ING. Stem stabilization at 5%. 10%, 12%. Carter coughed violently, black spots dancing in his vision. The stabilizers were engaging, but not fast enough. He had one last play. The last of his strength, he ripped the reactor dampener override and slammed it down manually, forcing the power core into an emergency shutdown sequence. For a brief moment, the station shook violently. And everything went still. Carter exhaled shakily. Then collapsed. Final words. The command center watched in absolute silence as the reactor stabilized. The station held. Tarkven's hands trembled over the console. Carter's vitals were almost gone. Tarkven clicked into the comms, voice unusually quiet. Carter. Nothing. Then, barely above a whisper, the human exhaled. Told you I wasn't dying today. And then, blackness. The silence in the command center was deafening. Tarkven's claws flexed anxiously over the console, watching Carter's vitals plummet dangerously close to flatlining. Medical teams report. Tarkven barked. A Shaltari medic's voice crackled through the comms. We have him. He's alive, but barely. The command deck exhaled collectively, though the relief was short-lived. Barely alive was still too close to dead. Dragging a human back from the brink. The medevac team sprinted through the scorched corridors, dragging Carter's limp, barely breathing form onto a stabilization gurney. His suit was cracked, irradiated, and burned beyond recognition, but what disturbed them most was his breathing. It was too slow, too shallow. Get the serum into him now, one of the medics snapped. The Drazol combat surgeon, a hardened veteran who had seen countless warriors die, hesitated over Carter's bloodied body. His internal trauma is extensive, the surgeon rumbled, scanning Carter's vitals. 4 cracked ribs, severe lung scarring, second-degree burns, oxygen deprivation. Tarkven's voice growled over the comms. The Drazol hesitated, and yet he fights. The medics injected the emergency stabilizers, flooding Carter's bloodstream with nanite-assisted repairs. His body twitched involuntarily as the advanced medicine fought to keep his failing organs functional. A full minute passed. Then Carter sucked in a deep, ragged breath. Command deck erupted in relieved chatter. Vern let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Get him to intensive care. If he dies after all this, I will personally ensure he is resurrected just so I can kill him myself. The survivor awakens. It took 6 hours before Carter's eyelids even fluttered. When he finally forced his eyes open, the room was dimly lit, the quiet hum of medical equipment filling the air. His entire body felt like one massive bruise. For a moment, he just stared at the ceiling, his mind foggy. Then a voice clicked from the corner. "You are an unreasonable creature." Carter turned his head slightly, spotting Tarkvan standing near his medical bed, arms crossed. The alien's usually rigid posture looked tense. Carter grinned weakly. "I get that a lot." Tarkvan exhaled sharply. "You should be dead. By all logical standards, you should have perished 3 times over. And yet here you are." Carter coughed, wincing. "Hate to disappoint." Tarkvan clicked his mandibles. "Disappoint? Carter, your existence defies sanity. Do you realize what you did?" The human thought for a moment, then shrugged. "Put out a fire?" Tarkvan stared at him. "You stabilized an entire reactor core through sheer force of will while in an oxygen-deprived, critically wounded state," Tarkvan said flatly. "And then you had the audacity to survive." Carter just chuckled. It hurt. A lot. But it was worth it. The galaxy takes notice. While Carter recovered, news of his impossible survival and heroism spread like wildfire through the station and beyond. The Drazul warriors, once skeptical of human resilience, now regarded Carter with a mix of respect and disbelief. Shaltari scientists updated their medical databases, adding a new subsection under human survivability anomalies. And the station crew? They started calling him the man who wouldn't burn. Even the Vorksian tactician, a species known for their cold logic, muttered, "Perhaps humans do not abide by normal probability." A final warning. Days later, as Carter sat up for the first time, Tarkvan returned with a datapad. "There is something you should know." Carter raised an eyebrow. "More bad news?" Tarkvan's eyes narrowed. "Possibly." He placed the datapad in front of Carter. "We analyzed the fire's behavior. It was unnatural." Carter's expression darkened. "I figured." Tarkvan tapped the screen. "We believed it was engineered." Carter sat up straighter, despite the pain. "What?" Tarkvan's mandibles clicked in agitation. "Someone, or something, created that fire. It wasn't just an accident." The realization settled over them like a heavy weight. The fire had been a test. And someone had been watching. Carter exhaled, then smirked despite everything. "Well, whoever they are, I hope they were taking notes." Tarkvan narrowed his eyes. "Why?" Carter's grin widened. "Because next time, I'm bringing a bigger hose." Carter swung his legs over the edge of the medical bed, wincing as a sharp ache rippled through his ribs. His body was still in recovery mode, covered in bandages and healing burns, but he had no intention of staying in that bed any longer. Tarkvan stood with his arms crossed, mandibles clicking in disapproval. "You should still be resting." Carter shot him a lopsided grin. "And you should be used to the fact that humans don't do what they're told." Tarkvan exhaled sharply. "At least pretend to have common sense." Carter ignored him and instead tapped the datapad, pulling up the station's diagnostic logs. He needed to see it for himself. The fire hadn't been natural. That meant someone, or something, wanted that station to burn. The first thing he noticed? the ignition point. The ghost in the fire. The flames hadn't started in a maintenance bay. That was the assumption everyone had made initially, but according to the new data, the first heat spike had originated in one of the station's restricted sectors. To 12. Carter frowned. What's in Sector 12? Tarquin hesitated for half a second too long. Classified. Carter arched a brow. Oh, hell no. You don't get to pull that after I almost died fixing your mess. Tarquin glared at him. It was not our mess. Then whose was it? The alien exhaled, glancing toward the door as if considering whether or not to tell him. Finally, his mandibles clicked in resignation. Sector 12 is an experimental research facility. Carter frowned. Researching what? A pause. Then, in a low voice, containment studies. Carter's stomach sank. He didn't like that answer, not one bit. The survivors speak. As soon as Carter was medically cleared for movement, a process that required him to walk out of the medbay under his own power before anyone could stop him, he made his way to the survivors of Sector 12. There weren't many. Out of the 50 scientists stationed there, only 4 had made it out alive. Carter stood in front of a nervous-looking Shaltari scientist, whose eye stalks twitched erratically. "You were in the lab when it happened?" Carter asked. The scientist swallowed hard. "Oh, yes." Carter crossed his arms. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Scientist hesitated. Then he whispered, "It wasn't a fire." Carter's breath hitched. "Come again?" The scientist's skin paled. The heat spike, the destruction, it wasn't just combustion. It moved too fast, too intelligently. His eye stalks trembled. It was alive. A cold shiver ran down Carter's spine. A fire that thinks. Carter turned to Tarquin. "You hearing this?" Tarquin nodded grimly. "I feared as much. We've encountered heat anomalies before, but nothing on this scale. This wasn't just an accident. This was something else." Carter ran a hand through his hair, processing what that meant. A fire that behaved unnaturally, that moved like it had intent. Like it was hunting. He exhaled. "Tell me we have containment procedures for something like this." The scientist looked away. That was answer enough. The warning comes too late. Before they could react, the station alarms blared. On ing. UNAUTCHORIS DD System ACCS DTTCTD. Tarquin's claws tightened. What now? The overhead lights flickered ominously. And every door on the station slammed shut. Carter's gut lurched. That's not normal, is it? The scientist's face drained of color. It's trying to get out. Carter felt a cold sweat break out. You mean to tell me whatever that thing is, it's still here? Before anyone could answer, the temperature in the room spiked. Carter turned, just in time to see a wall panel begin to glow red-hot. Something was melting through. Tarquin's voice was tight with horror. "We never stopped it. We only slowed it down." Bulkhead buckled, and Carter realized the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Carter felt the heat radiating from the warping bulkhead. The metal screamed as it twisted, liquefying under something far hotter than any ordinary flame. Instinct screamed to him to run, but he held his ground. Tarkven's mandibles clicked sharply. "We need to move. Now." "No argument there," Carter muttered. The remaining scientists were already scrambling for the exit, but as soon as the first one reached the sealed door, the station's security lockdown refused to budge. Carter slammed his fist against the control panel. "Damn it! It's trapping us." Tarkven snarled, drawing his sidearm. "I will not die caged like an animal." Then, with a horrible shriek, the bulkhead gave way. A wave of impossible fire flooded through the breach, not just flame, but something alive. It moved like liquid, shifting unnaturally, flickering like a living organism, and worst of all, it was aware of them. Fire reached. Carter barely managed to yank the scientist backward before the flame lashed out, melting through the floor where he had just stood. This wasn't fire. This was something else entirely. The fire's true nature. The flames didn't spread normally. They coiled, hesitated, even pulsed like a heartbeat. Carter's mind raced. Fire doesn't act like this. Doesn't think. Fire doesn't hunt. Then it clicked. It wasn't just fire. It was a life form. The scientist next to him trembled. It's not burning indiscriminately. It's choosing. Carter's blood ran cold. It wasn't just an accident. This thing was testing them. Learning. And now, it wanted out. A desperate plan. "We have to vent this section," Carter said, his voice ironclad. Tarkven's head snapped toward him. "That would purge everyone here as well." Carter's mind was already working through the risk. Not if we make it to an emergency airlock first. The fire twisted unnaturally, shifting toward them as if it could sense their conversation. They were out of time. "Movie!" Carter roared. The group bolted down the corridor, sprinting toward the emergency hatch as the fire surged after them. The station's power flickered erratically, as if the creature was pulling energy from the systems itself. "It's evolving," Carter thought grimly. "We don't have long." The final stand. They reached the airlock with seconds to spare. Carter and Tark slammed the override controls, forcing the hatch open. The heat behind them intensified. Carter didn't need to look back. He could feel the thing bearing down on them. The scientist tripped. Without thinking, Carter lunged, grabbing his collar and dragging him inside. Tark then slammed the emergency seal. Boom! Ire collided against the airlock, tendrils of flame curling against the reinforced barrier. The metal hissed, but the seal held. For now. A dead man's switch. Carter's hands flew over the airlock terminal. "I can override the station's venting system manually, but it's on a time delay." Tarkven narrowed his eyes. "How long?" Carter met his gaze. "Long enough that if we're still here, we're screwed." Tarkven hesitated, then clasped Carter's shoulder. "You truly are a mad creature." Carter grinned, despite everything. "Tell me something I don't know." He slammed the final override key. The purge. Across the station, warning klaxons blared. Agency atmospheric purge engaged. The vents burst open, howling as the station's internal pressure ripped the fire into the vacuum of space. Through the observation window, Carter saw it. The fire didn't just vanish. It fought. It twisted, burning unnaturally, coiling against the vacuum as if trying to resist. But in the end, it lost. The last flicker of flame was torn into the void. Silence fell. Then Carter slumped against the wall, exhaling. Well, that sucked. Tarkvan's mandibles twitched. Understatement. The scientist collapsed in relief. Is it over? Carter watched the empty blackness beyond the viewport. He wasn't sure. An unsettling aftermath. Hours later, as the station's emergency crews assessed the damage, Tarkvan approached Carter. "We owe you our survival," the alien admitted. Carter snorted. "Again?" Tarkvan sighed. "Again." Then Tarkvan's tone darkened. "But I fear is not truly gone." Carter frowned. "What makes you say that?" Tarkvan handed him a datapad. It was a heat signature scan. And there, on the very edge of the system, was a faint, impossible reading. Glad it survived. Carter exhaled. "Well, shit." Tarkvan nodded. "Indeed." Carter cracked his knuckles. "Guess I'll need a bigger extinguisher."